All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? It looks like we're filling the room. My name is Judd Choate. I'm the Elections Director for Colorado, and welcome to our webinar on dealing with elections disinformation from the front lines. You'll excuse my ugly sweater for the day. It's ugly sweater day at the office. I tried to tell them that the Kansas City Royals are not ugly, and their sweater is not ugly, but I have won the award for ugly sweater, so I don't know what that means. But we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining. We really appreciate it. We're going to spend the next hour talking about mis and disinformation with two experts who have both had roles in state government and also are very familiar with ways to tackle mis and disinformation. So next slide, please. So you'll see on your page that if you want a live transcript, so you can follow along with the closed caption, you can select that. And also just be aware that we will be fielding questions later on in the session, so please do put those in. And it's great if we get them along the way during the course of the presentation, because then I can kind of curate them. Sometimes we get similar questions, so it gives me a chance to look them over as we're hearing from the presenters. Next slide, please. Today's speakers. So we're actually going in reverse order from that, so I'll start with Nate. Nate Blumenthal has worked in election security since 2016. He led a federal government effort to address foreign disinformation in the electoral process. He also stood up and ran the first ever state level team that was focused on countering foreign disinformation in elections. That just happened to be in Colorado. So we're sad that Nate left us, but he did a great program while he was here. And he's also played a leading role in helping to improve physical security for elections officials in the wake of 2020. So Nate will be our first presenter, but let me also introduce you to Karen Brinson Bell. Karen Brinson Bell has served as the Executive Director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections since June of 2019. She worked in elections administration since 2006 at the county, state, and also at national levels. As North Carolina's chief elections official, she leads 65 full-time employees at the state agency that's charged with administering elections, running campaign finance, compliance, and then overseeing 100 county boards of elections and ensuring voting access to more than 7.4 million voters in North Carolina. So those are our two speakers today. Let me talk to you a little bit about our program here at the University of Minnesota real quick. If you could advance slide, please. Thank you. So at the University of Minnesota at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, we have what's called a Certificate of Elections Administration program. This is a program where you can earn your Certificate of Elections Administration through taking a 12 credit program over the course of as long as you want to do that program. It's an online program, so you can access it anywhere in the US and around the world. We have a great record of placing graduates. In fact, a couple of people who took this program work for me here at the Colorado Department of State. And we are accepting applications for the overall program through January 3rd, but you can take individual classes if you want to. And we're going to talk about those at the end of the program, and I'll walk you through some of the great classes that are being offered this semester. And you can learn more about the program if you go to that email address. You can also look up, if you put in HHH, so for the Hubert H. Humphrey School, and then put in CEA, which is Certificate of Elections Administration, so HHH CEA. Do a little search, it's the top thing that comes up, and you can learn all about the program. All right, next slide, please. So there's more information. There's your link to get more information about the program, and you can see HHS CEA. Next one. And these are some of the classes that are happening this year. You can see amazing instructors. I mean, ignore that top one, but then amazing instructors. Whitney Quisenberry is doing a class on election design. She's at the Center for Civic Design. Like, those are the people you bring in to to handle your really tough design questions. Tammy Patrick is doing a data analysis and elections administration course, which, and of course, Tammy is the queen of data and PowerPoint, so she knows great ways to sort of understand and display data. And then Maurice Turner is doing an election security course, so that 3984, which is the main course in election security. We also have a focus in election security where if you take 2 classes, you can have the CEA certificate plus a focus on election security, which is unironically exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So it's a good transition. So next slide, please. So we have this webinar today on this and disinformation, but we also have one in February. We haven't quite nailed down the date yet, and that is on obstacles for Native American voters. And it's going to be by Jacqueline De Leon, who is one of the researchers for the Native American Rights Fund, who has done a major research project on obstacles in Native American voter space. So that's going to be really exciting to learn more about that. And by the way, that applies to all states. You might think to yourself, well, I don't have reservations in my state, or I don't have sort of centers of Native American population. Well, this really does apply to people who are urban setting Native Americans, but also rural or reservation setting. So it should be very exciting and educational for everyone. Well, in the spring, we're also going to do one on election audits in April, and we'll figure that one out and we'll send you out more details. All right, next slide, please. And that's because we're done with slides. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Nate Blumenthal, who's going to walk you through some of the national efforts on mis and disinformation and the kind of what we saw in this last election cycle and what we can anticipate going forward. That might not be much fun, but we'll learn about what we're facing in 2024. So I'll hand it over to Nate.
Hey, Judd, thanks for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Cody, okay, thanks, Cody. So Cody will be driving slides for us, so please bear with us a little bit as we work through this. I won't take too much time because we have a few other presentations, as Judd mentioned, and in addition, I'm guessing there'll be a fair amount of questions. So disinformation, broadly speaking, and in particular in regard to the electoral process, so it's a big issue, and we could spend hours and hours and days speaking about it. But I thought it would be really useful to actually spend about 5 minutes running through what I think is one of the biggest issues out there as it relates to disinformation electoral process, and something we've heard about for 6 years now, but I'm not sure how much has kind of all been put together in one package for folks. And I'm hoping by the end of this, it'll make a little more sense kind of what we are facing from our foreign adversaries abroad. So the bottom line is there are a number of key foreign adversaries out there, namely China, Iran, and Russia, which do not adhere to our worldview or democracy or freedom or liberty or anything along those lines. They are autocracies or theocracies or whatever it may be, depending on what word you want to use. But again, they do not share our ideals at all. They are not a democracy. And they have been working very hard now for the past 6 years using disinformation to achieve 2 primary objectives. One is to divide America, and the second is to decrease confidence in democratic functions broadly, but in particular with a big emphasis on the electoral process. I'm sure everyone's heard about that, but again, what I thought would be useful is to kind of walk through what we've seen actually coming from the federal government, our partners who are out there working in the military and law enforcement, in the intelligence community to keep us safe every day, what warnings they've put out over the years. So I'm just going to take a second and walk through some of the stuff they've given us a heads up on for the past 6 years. Hopefully, again, this will give you a sense of the threat that we have faced and what we will face moving forward, and then I'll hand it over to Karen. So Cody, if it's okay, we're just going to kind of work through these pretty quickly here. So next slide, if you don't mind. So starting in 2016, I'm sure we're all aware of information that came out on the threat to the electoral process in regards to disinformation. The Director of National Intelligence oversees all intelligence community, intelligence departments and agencies, and they put out what they call a national intelligence estimate on important things. They did that in 2016. It's on their website. I encourage anyone to go take a look at it. And you can see very clearly here that in 16, one of our foreign adversaries' primary efforts was to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process. So it's a very big deal that that was called out publicly. And so that was in 16. And Cody, if we can move on, because it doesn't end here. In 2018, we saw something similar. Usually every year, the heads of our law enforcement, military, and intelligence communities will come before Congress and give a rundown on what they view the threat to be for the upcoming year. And here you can see in 2018 that they highlighted a foreign adversary wanted to, again, produce trust and confidence in the democratic process. So this has been going on now for 2 years. It continued into 18. Cody, if we could bump through the next one. And here we are, even 2 years later. The Department of Homeland Security, the folks that guard our border, interdict drugs, do a lot of cyber stuff, and are also involved in some election security work. They put out an assessment every year, kind of giving the state of play. They call it the Homeland Security Assessment. And ahead of 2020, they're very clearly called out that adversaries were going to be using disinformation essentially to decrease confidence in the electoral process. So I'm sure everyone sees a trend here, but this is, again, now we're 4 years after the 2016 attack, and we still had foreign adversaries looking to undermine all our confidence in one of the most important things we have in this country, the electoral process. Cody, if you could move to the next slide. In 2020, there were a few assessments came out that were released, and another one was from the Department of Homeland Security. This time, the FBI was involved, and I think you can kind of read this for yourself, but very clear that this assessment also indicated that foreign adversaries were looking to discredit the electoral process and decrease our confidence in elections. Cody, next slide, if you don't mind. And this is a readout, I think, after the 2020 election of what happened, and you can see very clearly here that they were working to undermine confidence in the electoral process. So again, I think everyone can see a trend here that's going on, but we're basically 5 years worth of unclassified military, law enforcement, and intelligence reports indicating what our foreign adversaries were doing. If we could just move to the next slide, Cody. Fortunately, it didn't end, and it continued through this election. Department of Homeland Security and the FBI put out another one. I won't run through all this, but I do want to highlight the fact that this go around, our partners and friends in law enforcement and the intelligence community made clear that foreign adversaries may actually attempt to incite violence around the electoral process, which is a very big and concerning development. Next slide, please, Cody. Thank you. So again, those are just a few of the reports that came out over a 6-year period on foreign adversary efforts to undermine our confidence in the electoral process. There are plenty of others. But when folks kind of hear about this, in my experience, it tends to be somewhat in the background as part of a broader conversation. And again, I just thought it was very important to briefly run through the fact that we have now seen in every election cycle, 16, 18, 20, and 22, that our friends in law enforcement, military, and intelligence communities have made clear what our foreign adversaries are trying to do. Moving forward, I would personally assess that they will continue to do this. I think there are massive issues at stake for our foreign adversaries. Iran, China, and Russia all absolutely want us to doubt our electoral process and ultimately weaken the United States of America for a variety of their own interests and issues, which I'm happy to walk through in some of the questions if anyone is interested in doing so. But this kind of gets to one of the most important parts, and I know Karen will talk about this, and I'll circle back a little bit and talk about it from the Colorado angle as well. But it is just really important for, I think, all of us Americans to remember that there are enemies out there that are working to cause doubt in every one of us about the electoral process, and ultimately cause doubt about how we feel about our neighbors, people in our community, and our election officials. And it is just very vital, in my view, that if you see something on social media and it makes you angry, it makes you doubt what's going on, it makes you think that there's some deep state effort, just take a second and pause. Just please remember that the elections are run by a ton of people who are part of your community. They probably coach football with you, or their kids are on your kids' football team. They might even be in the same church. And if you have questions, instead of being upset and believing them, pick up the phone, call your county clerk, call your Secretary of State's office, have a discussion, learn about it. Volunteer, become an election observer, watcher, or judge, learn the process from the inside. And just always remember, when you're seeing stuff out there, particularly on social media, there could be unnamed foreign adversaries who are behind it, trying to decrease your confidence in the electoral process and your confidence in your fellow American. So that's just a quick rundown. And Judd, I hope that was succinct enough, and I will hand it back over to you all.
Hey, thanks a lot, Nate. So just to give you a preview, I've already gotten a couple of questions. So we'll save these for the end, but just to tee them up, we've gotten a couple of questions asking, hey, this started as foreign, but now it's sort of shifted to domestic actors repeating all this stuff. How do we adjust our focus? How does the federal government adjust its focus? How does the nonprofit world and elections officials deal with this sort of evolving issue? So that's kind of an interesting question that we can talk about here shortly. In the meantime, I will come to Karen. Karen has been on the front lines of dealing with these kinds of questions and has developed an outstanding program. And frankly, it's the one that everybody in state elections is trying to emulate or wishes they could emulate. So she's the perfect person to come and talk to all of us about how to deal with elections, mis and disinformation on the front lines, as she says. So let me hand it over to her.
Thanks, Judd. Are you able to hear me and see my screen?
Yep, you're good.
Great.
Go for it.
My apologies to others for being with you stationary in my car, but in my car nonetheless. My travels to another meeting today did not go as planned, but thank goodness for technology and the ability to do this in any remote setting. And thank you to Judd and the University of Minnesota for having me on. I will kind of give you the background. I think it's good that we're already talking about foreign and domestic adversaries. Prior to my becoming state elections director in North Carolina, in the 2016 election, one of our larger counties had a situation occur with e-poll books. It was just an administrative error, but it got questioned as being something malicious or nefarious going on, suspect of whether Russia or some other adversary had interfered with the election. We were able to disprove all of that, but nonetheless, I think North Carolina's situation of having to address dis and misinformation began at that point, more so than what many other states seem to face from 2020 on. Of course, in 2017, that's when elections was designated as critical infrastructure. And because of those two things, the situation with the e-poll books, the critical infrastructure designation, and then also as I came on, we were going through a voting system certification. Some new systems were coming on and wanting to be certified in our state, which raised a lot of questions around the security of voting systems. We decided to take a proactive approach in our mind. In some way, it was a little bit reactive because of some things that had occurred. But in 2019, we held a press conference with our partners, both federal, state, and local, to announce our voter confidence campaign. We decided that rather than playing whack-a-mole, trying to address everything that was being put out in mis and disinformation formats, that we would, try to go at it our own way. Maybe it's pinball, maybe it's, an arcade game. I don't know. But however the case, we decided that we did not really want to spend our time playing whack-a-mole if we could avoid it. And we wanted to be able to proactively tell our story and get the facts out to the public. And so that is what prompted our voter confidence campaign. We initiated the hashtag Your Vote Counts NC. This actually came about with a competition between the state board employees and the county board staff. And the competition generated that hashtag. And little did we know that going with a more generic hashtag would benefit us, but we didn't have a crystal ball, but it certainly is one that has lasted through both security and safety concerns, in terms of the pandemic and so forth as well. It did mean that we had to expand our communications team. At the time, we only had one individual, our public information officer, who dealt with all things, disinformation, press releases, press conferences, you name it. And so we tried to expand that team with a web designer and with a general communications specialist, and also ultimately added a data communications specialist. Now, funding has meant that we've had to change up that team again, but as we headed into this and into 2020, we really wanted to solidify our communications effort in telling our story. And so it was also then that we revamped our website, which is ncsbe.gov. It became accessible. 2 additional languages were added. 3, and probably most important, was to be robust and user-friendly. We have a considerable amount of data, of information, of links to PDFs. We try to have the information out on our website in advance before the questions even come in when possible. So it helps us to be transparent, it helps us to be factual, and it helps us to ensure that the same message is getting across to the public. And it's actually, I think, reassuring to them that when there is a public records request, that often we can direct them to our website for the response. It's not something that we have to generate or come up with each and every time, which is also more efficient for our operations. Some examples of what's on our website. We do have a voter record search tool. So our voter history is here. This is where voters can find their sample ballots and their polling places, and just, user-friendly information for the voter. We do have a special section of our website that is dedicated to election security and includes what we've had out since that 2019 launch, 10 facts about election security in North Carolina. This is also available as a downloadable PDF, and we encourage people to give this out, when they're speaking or talking about elections, be it the Rotary Club or church event or a voter registration drive, because, it doesn't sound, there's more in many ways that we do than 10, but 10 really resonates with people. And it also probably shows that I'm from the David Letterman generation, but y'all can chuckle. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, please look it up. I've just dated myself. But the other emphasis that we have put on our website is the data. We have an extensive repository of data, and during the election cycle, it's updated daily. So it increases our transparency. It does mean that sometimes we get contacted that our voter registration list is out, out in other spheres of the web universe, and that's okay, because that is publicly available data in North Carolina, and we've published it, and we can track that. We, have our candidate lists available immediately whenever we're holding candidate filing. It basically just, again, trying to tell our story, trying to be transparent, but also trying to dispel, any misunderstanding of what it is that we do, and be ready for those data requests and public records requests in advance. We established ourselves predominantly on 3 social media accounts. That was one of the things. We can't be everywhere. And, there are certain aspects of social media where, we could try to be present, but you have to have significant followers. And so we decided to build out our following and our presence on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And that has proven to be very successful. We have substantially increased the number of followers that we have. And I'm going to show you some of the examples of a very concentrated campaign that came out of our voter confidence efforts. So each day there is a planned social media post that is put out onto these 3 accounts. And Mondays are Mythbuster Monday. And then we have other days where we just put out Election Law 101. We have a security day. We have a trivia day. And those are set. Our team works on pre-publishing, pre-planning to make sure that those are able to go out. We've taken a little bit of a lull because we've decided to focus on just some recognitions for a little bit, but throughout 2020 and even this past year, so 2020, 2021, 2022, these were regular posts, and we were making sure that we were telling our story and getting the facts out. That I'm going to sound like a broken record, but that's how our emphasis has been. And we have found it to be effective in voter confidence and our interactions with the media and with the public, and, with lawmakers who often get questioned as well. And, we've also put an emphasis on that data, putting that out on social media so that folks know where they can see the election night results, or how many registered voters that we have, and the breakdown of those demographics and so forth. So we make sure to highlight that. If anything, some might say that we have overdone social media, but we found it to be very successful in helping the public understand what happens in elections and pulling back that curtain. The other thing that we've put a increased emphasis on are press conferences. And this is a little more of me than I like to see on a slide, but it's the reality. Our public information officer, he works behind the scenes with the press, making sure that they have the press releases and media kits and those sorts of things that are needed. But he also is fantastic at ensuring that we commit to those interviews and make sure that we are the ones who are telling our story. So whether it be, local news or a press conference, or, just a series of webinars like this, we make ourselves very available because we figure that no one's going to tell our story better than the people who are on the front lines and who represent election administrators. And we also have, added to that, we have routine trainings for our counties. We call them huddles. We do those every other week, and it may be training on cybersecurity, or how to create their own social media presence, or how to utilize what we've created, because we've made sure that it is something that can be reshared, reposted, and is applicable to all 100 counties in their conduct of elections. We also, whenever we're in election seasons, we have Monday morning kickoffs, so that if there is an alert of some activity that could potentially create a ransomware situation or phishing attacks or anything of that nature, that we're prepared to support the counties and make them aware of what's going on. So it's a whole coordinated effort to make sure that we are readily available. And even with the press conferences, that is something that we now do the day before the election and the day of the election, and if necessary, the day after, or however often we need to following the election, to reassure the public, but to also educate the media in what's taking place as we release the results, have voting taking place on election day in person, and then of course any recounts and things like that that might be going on. So that's a broad overview of what we've been doing. And how we've worked in partnership with various agencies and with our county boards, and just the coordinated effort that we've tried to put forward to build voter confidence. And I'll turn it back over to Nate now.
Yeah, so Nate is going to talk a little bit about the program that we have here in Colorado, which he had an important role in developing. So Nate, take over, and I have a couple of slides if you want to, or things to put up if you want to show those.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I don't know, Karen, you're a tough act to follow. And honestly, really amazing work. I had a sense of what you all were doing down there. It was really good to see everything. I think we did a lot of similar stuff to some extent, and so I won't take a lot of time with this, but we thought there were kind of 4 key things that we really wanted to do to combat foreign disinformation in the 2020 election, which is when we really ramped up efforts in Colorado. And so we wanted to work to highlight the threat that was out there to Coloradans. We wanted to try to educate them a little bit about the electoral process, ensure they knew how things worked. And then the third is to really highlight the range of security measures. Colorado, interestingly, has tons of security measures before the election, during the election, and after. And this includes bipartisan Coloradans being involved in all those steps before, during, and after the election, being able to have a bunch of checks and balances. And then the last thing we really wanted to do is highlight some very simple guidance, we thought, on how best to stop and mitigate the spread of disinformation on the electoral process. And those 3 steps are: be aware that foreign adversaries are out there trying to manipulate you, right? Especially on social media. 2, think before you link or share or comment on something, right? Especially if it makes you angry, if it gives you this visceral reaction. This is what China wants, and Iran wants, and Russia wants. And the third is, when it comes to the electoral process, know where to go for trusted information. That could be your local county clerk, that could be your state level official. Don't just listen to the random stuff you see online. And so those are kind of the 4 main things we pushed. To get those out, we put money where our mouth was. We spent money on social advertising, digital advertising, search advertising. We did similar communication strategies, Karen, where we were releasing stuff on a weekly basis, and a couple of other things as well. And so I think, I'm pretty confident that it had an effect. It was a very tough year out there, but I think it was a good, worthwhile effort. Judd, if you want to pull up some examples, I think, of the material we put out, that would be great. So we put up a website, which again highlighted a bunch of things in terms of how our elections are secure, how you can kind of, if you see that last one, fight back with facts, those 3 steps I was talking about, really to try to get out to Coloradans information about the electoral process and how to become more resilient to the foreign disinformation threat. Part of that was, if you see these characters down here, we found that oftentimes, I think, Judd, in your and my long government careers, we have found that government agencies will put out a lot of stuff that if people see it, they will often forget it. It is bland. The sentences are very long. It is dry bureaucratic speak. And if you are trying to get folks to know where to go for reliable information, we were pretty confident that we needed to do something catchy and memorable. And so we created little cartoon characters that hopefully would catch your attention on social media or digital, where else, based around the Colorado state animals. It had some, kind of funny little taglines. You can't see it here, but the ads that would run on social had links to the Colorado Secretary of State and stuff like that, so folks knew where to go for reliable information. But again, we wanted to really catch people's attention and hopefully ensure they knew where to go, would then remember where to go for reliable information. So Judd, I think those are some of the main things we did. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much to both Nate and Karen. Great examples of what two states are doing, and then sort of trying to understand and get your arms around the problem. We do have some great questions, so thanks for those that have provided those. And I'm trying to coalesce them around some main ideas. So I'll start with the one that I've already previewed, which is yes, I think we all agree, or at least maybe sensible people agree, that the issue started with as a foreign campaign to sort of undercut democratic principles in the United States. But some of our questioners have asked, hasn't this sort of shifted to more of a domestic challenge? Isn't this now more of a problem with sort of the election denier extreme, and then some of our elected officials who seem to still be, or perhaps those who have lost elections, but elected officials and those who have lost elections who are still sort of locked into this principle that that there are bad elections out there and people trying to steal elections and still, you know, kind of speaking these anti-democratic ideas. I'll open it up to both of you. Karen, why don't you kick us off?
Absolutely. And I do think that it started, you know, around foreign adversaries and the concerns that we had coming out of 2016, but it is definitely, you know, moved into where we know that we have to educate our voters at home. If they aren't confident in coming out and casting their ballot, then we're not serving the public that we're intended to serve. And so, you know, I don't think that if you consider the campaign that we've put together, you know, it's making sure that the right facts are out there, so that if there are foreign adversaries who try to twist or manipulate that, then if they go to the trusted source of information, that being their state board of elections or their county boards of elections in North Carolina, then they're getting the right information. And, you know, that may have been the premise, was starting to negate anything that the foreign adversaries put out there, but it is certainly held as the approach that we take with any domestic adversaries, or you know, anyone that's denying, you know, how we conduct elections. So, you know, I don't think we've just made a distinction. We've just made sure that we approached it with, here are the facts, here's how it works in North Carolina, and in times, you know, here's how it works throughout the United States, to make sure that, you know, there is a trusted source of information. These are the facts. And, you know, if you can find your way to our social media or to our website, that you're going to get the accurate information that you need, no matter from which approach you're coming from. And, you know, certainly I think we could probably all attest to the increase in public records requests, which may be efforts to even undermine. But again, you know, by having more data, more information out on our website and out in social media, it's helped us to be responsive to those as well.
Great. Nate, did you want to jump on that question as well?
Sure, Judd. I mean, I think Karen really answered it extremely well. Look, I mean, I think it was hopefully clear by the slide deck there that even for these midterm elections, our partners in law enforcement, military, and intelligence community were clearly warning us that foreign adversaries were working to decrease our confidence in the electoral process. But at the end of the day, the same guidance still to counter it still, I think, applies. And that's what Karen walked through, right? It's that people just need to be aware that there's foreign disinformation out there. They need to know to be a little bit skeptical about what they see online, and then they need to go to trusted sources, right? Which would be Karen, for example. Don't just listen to Bob on Facebook. Could be Bob down the street, could be Bob somewhere else. Who knows? Go to your local election official. And in terms of election officials, I think the same tools apply, which is taking a number of steps to communicate about the process, how it works, security stuff, and also who you are and how to contact your office with questions on the process are really still vital tools to getting after it.
All right, thank you. Another question we had was, how are we measuring success in this effort? Do we have metrics on how many people have been swayed away from the dark side? How many are we tracking phone calls? Are we tracking emails? Or are there ways to measure success? And then also, how much traction are we getting with the media and those people who can amplify our messaging? Karen?
The metrics have really been difficult. I'll say for starters, we had no advertising campaign. So all of this is homegrown or worked out with our State Department of Information Technology and our partners behind the scenes. But, you know, the metrics for us have really been one, have we increased our followers on social media? And we have. And so that means that that effort is justified for us. You know, we do track the amount of media coverage that we're getting, and you know, and we can see that that's working. So that's why we continue to make the press availability effort. And then, you know, the other, I think for us, and the most reassuring is at a time when people say that our voters do not trust elections, North Carolina has seen some of the highest voter turnouts. And I hold that you don't participate in something you don't trust. So we hold that, you know, when you have a 75% turnout in 2020, that there has to be some understanding and belief in the system. So we use that as a metric as well. I will say we've also got some academics that are looking forward to helping us with the research, and we're going to take them up on that.
Yeah, I think that it feels like that's the next thing to do, which is to better understand how different messaging is working and with what audiences. I'm speaking for myself, but I feel like in 2020, we were sort of doing the shotgun approach, trying to just do anything we could think of, not really knowing what was working and what wasn't. Nate, do you have a sense at the national level what's going on along those lines, metrics and you know, media traction? I'm not hearing you, Nate. So are you?
Oh, hey, can you hear me now, Judd? Okay. So I'm not aware of anything at the national level that would be tracking impact and stuff like that. I will say, though, similar to Karen and Judd, I think you mentioned this a little bit, we did have some stats in Colorado, right? You get stats when you run things on search and when you run things on social media. It's, again, I think a great way to take a look at potential traction, or at least it is a metric, is the reach of your social media accounts. And I do think we saw an increase in that. So I don't know if there's a perfect answer towards impact in metrics and traction, but I think there are a few ways to measure it. And I do think that in Colorado, we did gain some traction in 20.
Yeah, and just to speak to one issue that's come up in some of the questions, I mean, right now we're sort of talking about mis and disinformation and how to tackle it, you know, sort of the straight-on approach to a central question. But I think it is fair to say that this has then sort of metastasized in other things, like threats against elections officials and making our lives all much more difficult with things like open records requests and endless lawsuits. I spent all day yesterday on 2 different lawsuits, 2 court appearances. So it's, you know, I used to do that occasionally. I used to do mis and disinformation occasionally. Now it's sort of a dominant part of my job. So it's, this is definitely evolved, and we see sort of the threads of that in all of the daily work that many elections officials find themselves in. Just that's kind of the bigger picture of how all this works. We do have a question specifically about Karen. So you have developed this North Carolina program. How did you develop it? Did you have special funding? Did you bring on special personnel? I mean, what makes you so special? How'd you pull this off, Karen?
There is no crystal ball. There was no magic tree of funding. Matter of fact, we had no particular funding for it. We were fortunate that our state Department of Information Technology was trying to get state agencies to move over to a new platform for accessibility reasons and user friendliness. And we took them up on it because we knew we needed to do that. And we did pretty much all the content in-house. I mentioned that we did add a web designer, and we had that person on grant funding for a period of time, and that helped us to make that transition. So there was some money spent in that sense, but the rest is really just making that commitment. And we started in 2019 with our social media planning and starting to do those posts. And once we got rolling, it really wasn't this overwhelming commitment. We plan a month out, and then we insert anything that's, timely or unexpected that needs to be pushed out. And, that's what I would encourage anyone to do. It's, decide what is, manageable, and just start it. You'll get the ball rolling, you'll find your groove, and you'll get your message out. And, as much of this was to counter mis and disinformation, it was also to make sure that we were getting information to people who did trust us, but who wanted to be informed whenever they go out and encounter someone who tries to, be a denier or question how our processes work. So, we take that approach too, is just making sure that the people who do trust what we do are informed and can tell our story when we can't tell our story. And, I think that's really just it. There's not a great expense to what we've done. There's certainly things behind the scenes where we're protecting against ransomware attacks and denial of service attempts and things like that, but that's separate from mis and disinformation, and that requires cybersecurity experts and so forth. But to just tell your story is not a big lift. It's just, committing to it, determining what's manageable, and then mapping that out. To Judd's point, he's been in lawsuits, and so have we, and so forth. But, I make a commitment to make myself available for the media interviews and so forth. And so, when we're in the midst of an election, our PIO knows that if he's approached, he can insert 3 or 4 media interviews in a day if that's what's necessary. Zoom and things like that have made that much more manageable as well. And, I think that's sometimes the most effective thing that we can do in addition to these social media posts, because it's all free.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, I'll just throw out my 2 cents on the Colorado program. I think the biggest, we've gotten actually a number of questions about what we can do either as individuals or organizations. And that's a really tough question, because it feels big for us. I mean, it feels like a gigantic problem that we are struggling with every day. And I, run an office of 45 people. So and Karen has 65 people. So we have resources, and it still feels like an overwhelming problem. So as an individual, it's really feels overwhelming. But I guess what I would say is be a part of a network of people who's always providing good information. So, friend your SMEs, the subject matter experts, people like Karen, people in our office, or the county folks who frankly know this stuff even better than the folks at the state offices do. So make those offices and the people that work at those offices your trusted sources, and then convey that information out. Be part of a network of people who is always conveying good information. And then if you want to be a jerk, I kind of do this occasionally. Tell people when they're wrong. No, that's incorrect. Here's who you should be talking to. Sorry, Karen, go ahead.
Judd, I just thought about the fact too is, don't make it daunting for yourself. We don't come up with new content every single post. The one that was Mythbuster Monday about voter registration gets turned into, a trivia question 2 months later. We find ways to recycle, and, over a 3-year effort at this, I promise you, there's not been new content every single time. Repetitiveness gets its point across as well. So, that's another aspect of how to make this something that's manageable and not daunting.
And Judd, hey, can I ask a quick point there? I noticed those questions too. I think Yeah, the advice, in my view, that you and Karen gave is like absolutely spot on. Just again, to reiterate something from earlier, if you see something on social media and it really makes you angry, really makes you mad, it's a guttural, visceral reaction, if it makes you want to like it or makes you want to share it, if it makes you doubt a democratic process such as elections, take a second, please step back, right? And then go to a trusted source and take a few seconds to learn about what's going on instead of just having that reaction. They're trying to get that reaction from you. They want that. That is their intent. So I think a really good key to stop the spread of disinformation, to build our resilience, is just to remember that if you start to feel that when you're scrolling through social media, there's probably someone out there trying to get that reaction, and you should use a trusted source. So I just wanted to throw that out there, Judd.
You mean social media isn't all honest and, you know, flowers and roses? No, okay. So a couple more questions. First one, what did we see in 2022? Were we winning in 2022? Because I get the sense in Colorado that we were winning in 2022. The message was getting out, the media was more supportive. We weren't sort of equated. So lots of times in 2020 and after 2020, they were equating the denier with the actual official. That didn't feel like it was happening nearly as much. In fact, in many cases, instead of coming to us, the media was just debunking things on their own. They were like, I know that's wrong. And so they would have a story specifically talking about how something was wrong without even bringing in an election official to describe it. So it feels like 2022 was a step in the right direction. I know Nate is sometimes a glass half full. So I will say, or a glass half empty. So I'm going to guess that Nate's going to say that just wait until 2024, but maybe I'm wrong. Nate, what do you think?
I think it went as well as can be expected, Judd. I am a glass half empty guy. And I do think we all need to be very careful heading into 24. Again, remember that core guidance about using trusted sources. And if you're an election official, I think it's no time to kind of let your guard down on the threat of disinformation from foreign adversaries, and really work to continue to implement your counter disinformation efforts or stand up new efforts. I think it's really vital to maintain and probably even increase that heading through 24.
Karen, what do you think about that? Was 2022 a winning year, a losing year, a sort of middle year?
I'm usually the most optimistic, glass is full, not just even half full person. And I think I come down somewhere on that. It was a remarkable year. I think the win is that we were more on offense than on defense. And so what we've got to do now is not let our guard down. I think I totally agree with Nate on that, and be ready for 2024. I think what we particularly experienced in North Carolina, and I think I've heard this in other states as well, is that there definitely was still a group of folks pushing back, spreading mis and disinformation, certainly still denying even 2020 and creating extensive public records requests in particular. But I think what we saw seems to be a small but loud group of people. And that's a little bit different than I think we came out of 2020 with what seemed to be a larger group. So that's me being optimistic.
See, we have an empty and a full right there. So excellent. So our friend David Stafford, who I know all of us know, a wonderful election official from Florida, did want to stress, and I think this is a great point, that we should be telling our own story and supporting, to the extent that we feel comfortable, elections officials in other jurisdictions. But frankly, we don't do elections the same. I know Karen and I don't do elections the same. Karen and David don't do elections the same. So it's always hard to judge or feel comfortable speaking intelligently about elections in other jurisdictions because we don't know exactly how we don't know their laws and we don't know their policies. But you can be sort of generally supportive. I know that every state in the country runs democratic elections. I feel very confident that every jurisdiction in the country ran fair elections, and they just did it differently than I did. So it's kind of an interesting balance, but one I think all elections administrators kind of have to walk. And then there was one question which really struck me, and I'll just a point of personal privilege. So we had a question asking, is it advisable to call the Chinese adversaries? Because there are many people who are Chinese Americans or people that live in the United States who are very comfortable living in the United States as Chinese nationals. And so that's a tough balance. So I'll just say, as a personal story, my daughter is Chinese, and she is old enough to know what's happening and some of the conversations that happen around the dinner table. And so I've had to have this conversation with her, and it really is a tough thing to explain that people and governments are very different, and that when a government acts, it's not, generally speaking, acting on behalf of all of its citizens. In fact, it's perhaps acting in very selfish and narrow ways to advance a very particular foreign agenda. So it's tricky, but I do think that that's something that's important, and something that, frankly, I've had to sit around and mull over myself and have conversations. I've had conversations with my wife about how do we talk to our daughter about that. I mean, it's really it's kind of tricky, and I do understand the feelings that it arises. So, okay, well, so thank you very much. This has been a fantastic discussion, wonderful questions. We got like 30 some odd questions. So my apologies if I didn't get to them. I tried to sort of cherry pick some of those that sort of carried the conversation forward and didn't take us back to an earlier point. But I do really appreciate your engagement on so many of these really interesting questions. So let me, I'm going to put the slides back up again, and I want to tell you again about the great upcoming classes that we are doing in the CEA program at the University of Minnesota. So coming up this semester in spring classes, there is an elections and the law class. That's the class that I'm teaching. We have an elections design class. So that's like designing ballots, designing mailings, designing your posters and all the things that you have to do under your state law. And Whitney does an amazing job on that. In fact, we've invited the Center for Civic Design to come to Colorado on specific questions before, and Whitney has come and done amazing work. So that's going to be a great class. Data analysis and elections administration, Tammy Patrick, who you know, the rock star of Maricopa County, who most recently worked for the Democracy Fund and now is the new executive director of Election Center. She is going to talk about data analysis, and there's not a person on the planet that could talk to you better about the use of data in elections. And then Maurice Turner, who has done amazing work on elections security, will be teaching the election security course, which is part of that two-part election security focus that you can get if you're taking classes for the Certificate of Elections Administration. You can take individual classes, or you can sign up for the whole program. So you could take my class and then never take another one. You're like, that was terrible, I never want to take another one. Or you could take my class and you could take the requisite number of other hours in other classes and get your 12 hours and get your CEA and put that on your resume from here on out and be an elections administrator that has this more sophisticated education in these areas. So really encourage you, if you are at all interested in furthering your education in elections administration, or if you want to get into elections administration, to please consider looking into this program. I think the next slide has our contact information. There you go. So you can find out more information at those various links. Feel free to write those down. I think we're going to hold those up on the screen for a bit. And I would just note that our next one of these is going to be in February, and we're going to talk about Native American voting rights and the effect of laws and policies on that particular set of voters, which frankly has been very misunderstood and understood. So I really encourage you to be on the lookout for that. That's going to be in February. All right, well, hey, thank you very much for joining. Really appreciate it. Thanks to Karen, thanks to Nate. And we do appreciate all of you that have taken time to join us today. Please come back in the future. Have a great holiday. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.